Today, we have a very special guest to come on our show today. We'd like to thank you for joining us for another edition of the Red Pill Diaries. Our special guest today is Mr. Myles Hoenig. How are you doing today? We're getting a muted. It's muted. Yeah, they're muted again. For those of you who are listening, we had this type of problem behind the scene. Oh, here we are. We got you now. We
All
got
right.
you. All right, go.
One,
There
two,
you go,
three.
Myles. Go ahead. Tell the people who you are and
Okay.
your background and everything.
Okay. Well, first of all, my 9 to 5 job, which is not 9 to 5, is I'm a high school teacher. So I've been involved in virtual teaching since since last year. But I have been politically active since probably 1971 when I really first started. Right now, what I am is a Green Party activist, and I have been for many years. I helped to start 2 locals in the Baltimore area for the Green Party. I ran for city council. I ran for a congressional seat just 4 years ago. And I have managed a statewide Green Party campaign. I do a lot of writing for different organizations, for different publications on the views that you all share, I'm sure. So I'm just very happy to be here and be able to talk to you about whatever's on your mind, whatever's on my mind.
Yeah. Well, we're very thankful and we're very blessed to have you on the show. And I wanted to first start off by asking you a simple question. What is the Green Party? What is their platform? And why is it necessary, especially in today's political climate of two extremes?
The Green Party has been around. I won't go into the actual history because, frankly, I'm not good on dates and all that sort of thing. It doesn't mean much. It's the overall picture that matters. The Green Party represents, especially now, the last few years, an eco-socialist platform for the United States. And being that there are Green Parties throughout the world, every state, every nation has a tweak in what the Green Party stands for. But there are 10 pillars that the party believes in. I won't go into them all. You can just go online, GPUS, and check it out. But it's clearly issues that deal with no wars, environmental sanity, Black Lives Matter as in every aspect, Medicare for all, everything that really is what we know we need, we know we want, we know we're not going to get it because of the two-party system. Now, as a national party, we have to go through so many hoops just to be on ballots. Every state is controlled by either the Democratic or the Republican Party, and they do all that they can to restrict not just the Green Party, but libertarians and you name it, any other party from the left or the right, more on the left. They do what they can to restrict for ballot accessing. And when we do get on, we don't get the media coverage, of course, because the media is pretty much controlled by the Democrats and the Republicans. So it's a two-party or 1.5-party system, being that I always see the Democrats as kind of like the liberal aspect of the Republicans, and the Republicans just being insane, as I think Chris Hedges said. So, it's we believe in peace. We believe in strong environmental regulation. We believe in strong government control of corporations because it is they who determine what goes on in Washington in Congress. They're the masters when it comes to legislation. They write it. They lobby for it. They pay their legislators to do what they want through contributions. We in the Green Party and other leftists are very much on the sidelines. So we're pushing to get in. It's very difficult. The Democratic Party I think it was in Wisconsin, Wisconsin and another state, just successfully prevented the Green Party from even being on the ballot for this coming election. So they will spend their money, their time, their energy, their resources to fight us rather than even doing their own organizing for their own party. And then, of course, they blame us when they lose because, they own our votes, right? Everybody's supposed to vote for the Democrats who have any sense of liberal or progressive thought, and it's near insane and criminal just how they think of themselves and who they think they own, who they control, and well, we know who they own and control.
Hmm. I've actually interviewed another Green Party candidate that we had close ties or whatever, but it was your Green Party candidate for president, which is two-time Congresswoman Cynthia McKinney.
Oh, sure.
At one time, yeah, she's magnificent.
2008, I think she ran, right?
Huh?
I think she ran in 2008.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Mhm.
yeah. But on that note, what is the political environment of today? Because we see a lot of blame, we see a lot of extremism on one side and extremism on another side. We see a lot of I hear even with Joe Biden and I hear with Trump, they often talk about the middle class, but no one ever talks about the bottom class. Why is that?
Because the middle class has the money to give them contributions, even if it's just a little bit at a time. The bulk of the American population is middle class. Depends on how you determine where that cutoff is, but it's the working class that keeps this country running. Without us, without I can't say me because I am a teacher. That's I have to acknowledge my status and economic status in America. But the working class, and I do think that includes just about everybody except the very high, the
Hmm.
1%. We run the country, but it's they who govern. It's the 1% that sets the rules. We have almost no say in how things are going. We have labor unions, but the union leadership is in the pockets of the Democratic Party for the most part. We can work on local issues and have successes, but the working class is always on the bottom, and frankly, in this country, will probably always be. There is no such thing as social mobility. For very few individuals, yes, and you can move within a class. To move to the upper or anything higher, I personally just don't see that as possible in this country. We're very class conscious, yet everybody thinks they're going to be a millionaire. That's why we all play the lottery, because our lot in lives is not the way it should be, and many people are satisfied with the way things are. As long as they're better than the people down the street, they don't see who's really keeping us where we are, which are the bankers and the Congress and all that. They're just not looking at who the real enemies are. The two parties really like to pit people against each other rather than, because they know, if we organize, we would be up against them. And that's what they fear the most. They only represent, it's like between the two of them, they're almost 50% of the registered voters, meaning the other half is unaffiliated, and about 60% even are only the ones had votes of eligible voters. So so many more and more people are not part of the two party system, but we're controlled by them in so many ways. They set the agenda, they set the rules, they set everything. That's why we
Well,
need to fight it back.
how do you think a society or a republic can survive like that? Because you have a color divide that's growing, because you have a class divide that's growing, a wealth divide that is absolutely unconscionable. I mean, it's unbelievable.
Yeah.
How can a republic survive under such strain, especially when you throw on top of always meddling in other nations' business, and also the unheard of debt that is constantly accumulated by America?
Well, I would question what is a republic to begin with. If you just mean our country, because we're certainly not a democracy. We're not even a participatory democracy. We think we are, but we're not. Uh, what a question, How is it that we survive? How do we survive? I don't know. Honestly, I can be very cynical about this. I think because so much power is in the hands of so few, that it is extremely difficult for uh, an uprising. We were fortunate to see insurrections. I live in Baltimore, so we saw, with the Freddie Gray, we saw an
Mhm.
insurrection. It could have been our spring, but it wasn't. And it's happening all over. Springs are happening, uprisings, but they're being suppressed very brutally by Democratic and Republican mayors and governors. So it is they are on one side, whether one be black, poor, an immigrant, or whatever. We're being pitted against each other, and the powers being those in Congress and those who put them in Congress and those who expect that they will adhere to their agenda. They set the rules. I keep saying that, but I'm afraid that's true. We just need to do more organizing. We need to ratchet up a bit. I don't like looting and stuff like that, but you understand what violence is. It's a reaction when you're absolutely nothing left. When you look at the civil rights movement, it wasn't, Dr. King and his marches. It wasn't all the demonstrations, the sit downs at the lunch counters. What really galvanized the American people was Bull Connor and his dogs, and the shootings and the killings of the three workers down in I'm sorry, Mississippi, with the three voter registration folks who were murdered. It's unfortunately the violence that really galvanizes the American public. The kumbaya of demonstrations and all. That's where the administrations, the governors, the mayors, and all those who are controlling things say, yeah, this is America. They can demonstrate. They can express their views. Aren't they nice? Let's listen to what they say and then go on and do what they've been doing forever. I don't like violence at all, yet it is the violence that wakes people up. We would not be having a Black Lives Matter movement if it wasn't for people being murdered by the police. People have been killed by the police for years and years. People have been incarcerated since Joe Biden had it happen,
Mhm.
and there hasn't been a lot of a groundswell of opposition to that. It's only when there has been such brutal violence by the police and the establishment that people are finally getting off their asses and getting into the streets and doing something. That's what I have to say about that.
And, and do you think that America's international policy, her foreign policy, is a reflection of her domestic policies? Because we
In a way,
see,
yes.
yeah,
In a way,
because
yes.
we
Because
see a lot of double talk. We see a lot of divide and conquer. We see a lot of greed. We see a lot of corruption and a lot of ineptitude too, and
mhm.
malfeasance among government officials. And when you look at our foreign policy, it looks like it's mirrored back in the domestic policies.
Well, one of the key psychological aspects of Americans is the whole notion of American exceptionalism. With abroad, we are the best. Everything we do is for the best, and we do not take responsibility for our screw ups. It's always another person's fault. Domestically, we're in a way like that too. Just look at how Hillary Clinton lost in 2016, and the Democratic Party looked for other people to blame because of the sense of exceptionalism. It wasn't our fault. We didn't do it.
Mhm.
They did it to us, so we have to do something back to them. In foreign policy, it's also just a matter of capitalism. That's what rules everything in foreign policy, whether it be oil, whether it be water resources, whether it be the environment, you name it. It's controlled by capitalism, and that's what controls our lives here today. We're not a socialist nation. We stopped being anything near that in the 30s. And ever since, we've been on a very deep slide into depression, both economically, psychologically, emotionally, because of where we're going. And, as they say, this is the most important election in our lifetime. They say that every 4 years,
Mhm.
but it only gets worse. every 4 years, every 8 years, things get worse for us, not for those who are in control. When they say the economy is booming, sure, for Wall Street, they're the ones that, what it's doing for Main Street, for the people on the street, for workers and others. They don't care about that. It's whether or not one's 401k is going through the roof or not. That's what matters to those who control. So in a way, the exceptionalism is abroad, we are the best. At home, we know what's best for the American people. And what they say, what they want, what they need, well, we'll give it to them if we feel it suits us first. Those who control the moneyed class, the bankers, and that group.
So with a growing debt crisis, because we have to touch upon this because this is very
Yeah.
very serious with the growing debt crisis. And I was reading an article on one of the show's previous, or one of the video clips previous, a few days ago, and it was talking about that estimates are that America will lose her entire output of her economy this year. That's the estimates from some of the top economists. Over $16 trillion lost, right? That
Right.
they're expecting. With that said, why is it so hard for the so-called upper class or the ruling class to give money back to the working class, which is the poor and middle class, and they have a problem with that. But they give corporate welfare on a daily basis, and they continue to shell out hundreds of billions and sometimes backdoor trillions into the coffers of the same people who
Mhm.
started crises and who continues to help the crisis metastasize.
Well, a couple of trillion goes to the military, which
Mm,
isn't even accounted for. Why don't they give us more of that money? It's because if our lives were improved, we would see how good things could be. When people are struggling just to survive, if you give them something like healthcare, where they don't lose their homes because of a tragic medical instance, even with health insurance, you're thinking only of staying alive, of protecting your family, serving your family and others. If you were given the option of free healthcare, tuition assist, no, tuition, not even assistance, but tuition, uh, getting rid of all the debt for all the student loans that people have. That's billions and billions of dollars right there. Then you start getting people realizing, hmm, it could be a lot better than this. There is hope for a future, for a better economic future. So if you're kept struggling, you're focusing more on survival. And that's the bulk of the American people at this point. How many people are, what have no more than $500 in savings? That's the majority of the American middle class. You get a one car problem and there it goes. That means no job and everything else included. Then your stress goes up. You have a heart attack. Your blood pressure goes up. Everything is related. And that's intent by the ruling class to keep it that way. You're not going to have any challenge to the real upper class, the workers, the managing class, if you still have to pay rent, mortgage, or whatever. That's what. And the other thing is that we only have two parties. That's their way of keeping people down, Democrat or Republican. What can you do with that? They are not our friends in the least, but they pretend and we think they are. The Republicans, they'll stab you in the chest. The Democrats stab you in the back. At least the Republicans are more honest in how they hate you,
yeah.
whereas the Democrats, together, they work together. Look at the commission that does the debates. It is designed by both of them together to keep third parties out, because the League of Women Voters used to conduct the elections and the debates, but as soon as it started getting the third and fourth parties were having a say, the other two, they wouldn't stand for that, because that means more and more people will hear that there is an alternative. And that's why other things, if I may say, add on to this, the whole issue of ranked choice voting. It happens in Maine, it happens in other cities and places, But that would allow for people to vote for their third party choice. Democrats and Republicans don't want that because even though they'll still be on top, you'll see maybe 30% of a population wanting a third party. And but even though the Democrats and Republicans would win, that's scary for them to see that there is such a groundswell of opposition, to those two parties. So they do all they can to keep us in our place so that we can't rise up unless something cataclysmic happens. Again, like a Freddie Gray or anything like Wallace just now in
Yeah.
Florida, is it? I think
No,
it's
it wasn't in Florida. I think I cannot
uh,
remember. Philadelphia.
Philadelphia,
Philadelphia.
right up the street from me. Yeah. So when these things happen, there's always that spark. But after the election, people are going to forget about Black Lives Matter because it's going to be co-opted. The Democrats are going to be, if they win, that is, they're going to be saying, "Well, we're going to be working on these issues, controlling the police." Not, they're going to reform the police. They're not going to abolish the police. It's like Bernie Sanders. He wants to break up the banks. That's nice. As a socialist, you would say no, nationalize the banks. So that's the kind of mentality. They're only going so far. They're not going to go to that point where people actually see that there's real chance and real hope to do something really good for their lives. It ain't going to happen for a long time. We'll see what happens also with this election. This is an anomaly, this election with Trump. He is without doubt, it's hard to describe what he is doing to our system. In many ways, he's destroying it. In other ways, he's waking people up to what it really is. So, which way it goes, who can tell, really? And we'll
Yeah.
see what happens on election night if he wins, loses, if he accepts it, if he doesn't, if he calls out his SA,
Hmm.
they were the forerunners of the SS. Is he going to call them out? I don't know. I mean, it's a very frightening thing that could be happening, and it'll say what is our society like? What kind of a country? What kind of a republic are we? Where is it going?
And that was one of the things I wanted to get at. Where's the republic, or where is the democratic, as they like to say, quote unquote, nation going? But before you answer that, I want to go back to something that you hit upon. And then I'm going to I'll ask you this question, and I have one more question before I bring in my co-host, the other Rashid, to ask you a question.
Okay, sure.
So when you were talking about how tuition, we need free tuition, and we need why is it that Muammar Gaddafi was labeled a tyrant when
Right,
he
right.
when
Well,
he
we
took
always. I know your question. We always look for an enemy, and especially an enemy of someone who has done. I don't know
great
what
things?
can I say. Yeah, to their country. That's why this country has always opposed socialist governments, except for the European ones because they're only democratic socialists. We oppose any other country that really speaks to its people. You look to Venezuela, you look to Bolivia, you look to so many places that have worked on behalf of its people in a really true sense, and we demonize them. They are the next Hitler. Gaddafi not only gave tuition freedom, he gave new homes to married couples. He gave just so many things that the U.S. could never even imagine giving to
Free
our.
power and water.
Yeah, yeah. Well, they had the energy to do that and the petro money for that. Yeah, but it's because of just the history of Libya in the past, who it supported in the past, and the U.S. does not like those folks. And once an enemy, always an enemy, unless we defeat them in war. And then you look at Japan, you look at Germany. They're our strong allies because we defeated them.
Hmm.
But they try. But any country that tries to fight back, we don't fight countries that fight back.
Hmm.
We fight countries that don't have the resources. Again, I think it's part of that American exceptionalism. in a way, we're cowards. We don't take on. We are the bullies. We don't take on people who can give us a bloody nose. We just take on those who have no choice but to submit to our firepower.
Mhm. So, so saying that, and I go back to something that I said earlier about her foreign policy being a reflection of her domestic policy, as she crushes the weaker and less fortunate people in her domestic situation. She mirrors that in her international policy as she tries to crush nations that oppose her, that don't have the finance, the political, or the military means to combat her power or whatever. What do you say now with the rise of China, the economic rise, because it's official. All the stats have come out. China is no longer the number two economy, is no
Right.
longer the number one economy in purchasing power parity. It is now the largest economy,
Yeah.
bar none, with a income of 24.2 trillion um, versus America's 20.8 trillion. How is that playing into the South China Sea, the Indian China border conflict, the tensions with Japan and China, and America's plan to deploy strategic not intercontinental, but intermediate range missiles
Mhm.
in that area to surround Pakistan, China, and Russia.
Well, all empires die, and the American empire is on its last legs. Um, we are crazy enough to try to engage in war with all these countries, but I think at this point there would be such an uprising within the American people if we saber rattled beyond the point of just saber rattling, that I think the American people would finally rise up over something like trying to go after China or other countries. I think maybe I'm optimistic in this regard that the American people just might come to a realization that we're no longer number one. And the whole idea of American exceptionalism gets whittled down a bit as we start getting our own bloody noses. And in a way, we are just economically, as you state, we're having our own bloody noses by no longer being the most powerful economic country, and being that our economy is in the toilet now because of COVID and the way it was handled, and other countries rising above us, and it's getting obvious that we as a country are being taken out of the loop in a lot of international agreements and diplomatic relations between other countries. They're forming their own alliances. NATO, yeah, well, I can't speak of NATO, but other countries are no longer looking to the United States as leadership. And I don't think that'll really improve much under a Biden administration, because in a way uh, the line has been drawn in the sand, and we're not able to reach it. We're not going to go over it. The other countries, China and other countries, I think, will surpass us in more ways than just economic. And whether we do something proactive in the Gulfs, in the Indian Ocean, and the South China Sea, I don't think even we are that stupid to do that. I think even Trump would not have done that, because as much of a war criminal as he is for the crimes that he has committed, he is nothing compared to the Democratic Party when it comes to engaging in wars.
Mhm.
But I don't think at this point, because of the way things are shaking down, it's hard to think of a Biden administration trying to go to war with everybody. I think they may look at skirmishes with Venezuela and smaller countries, again, those that can't fight back. I think this is really a generational problem. It's going to take many years, decades to figure out just where we stand internationally. There will be a very cold war between China and the United States. How far it goes, I don't know. I really can't speak to that. I don't really know just to what extent our belligerence in the Middle East, towards Iran or towards China and others, just how it'll come out. It's nothing is certain anymore.
So with that, now I understand what you're saying, but China has come out and said that they are sick of America's bullying, and that if they do sell Taiwan those F-16s, those upgraded F-16s, and those what is it, 100 or 1,000 Harpoon missiles that can reach Shanghai and can reach Beijing, that this would be tantamount to a declaration of war. And
Hmm.
America, and it was just passed yesterday through the House, I believe it was, for this the sale to go through. Um, do you think that they because America has ruled unquestionably for the past most of the century, before the 20th 21st century, do you think that this is almost like a fallen bully lashing out because they no longer have the wherewithal or economically or militarily? Because remember, China also last year surpassed the United States Navy to become the largest navy in the world, also, and has the most advanced destroyers on the planet, according to the Pentagon.
Well,
So, go ahead. Go. Do you think this is lashing out because the bully no longer can bully anymore?
well, yeah, I think so many other countries are finally calling our bluff in a way, and we're going to be sending missiles to Taiwan. They if China really stands up to us, you know, I think we would try and find a way, a diplomatic way, or some other way of saving face, because I think the U.S. is in that position now that it has to save face, and it has to recognize that it is no longer number one as much as it believes it is. It's going to see, just in numbers, as you say, with the military, with the Navy, with their economy, they're going to see that the U.S. is no longer able to control things. And I really do think more and more Americans are seeing that our era is over. We're coming to an end. And that is, for me, optimistic, because it is sometimes a lot safer, better, more comfortable to be number two. You're not always defending your position on top. In a way, let this be China's problem now rather than ours. Instead of always having to be up front and fighting and do that, I don't want any other country like China to be doing it too. And they are very imperialistic. They're especially in Africa right now. But right now, in a way, the ball is in their court. And eventually, I do think the Americans will, the establishment will start recognizing that and try and find ways to accommodate themselves so that they can still play a major role. But, it's like whew, we're no longer the ones doing it.
Yeah. So I want to ask you, because we lost my co-host. He was clicked off. We were experiencing trouble
Yeah.
before the show and everything. But anyway, I wanted to ask you something about the domestic atmosphere, especially when it pertains to the international scene, because it seems like the people minds on such trivial things here in the nation, and they don't realize that there's a universal shift going on around the world, in power, in politics, in military power. They don't understand that there's a change in the monetary system, and how the nations are switching from dollar and European denominated assets over to Asian assets.
Mhm.
Why do you think that there is a concerted effort by the media as to play down and actually black out this stuff and have people minds on trivial things like the NBA finals and the NFL season and living with the Kardashians? And I, could could
It's
you?
a matter of control. It's a matter of control. First of all, I think Americans, not to be insulting, honestly, but very ignorant of anything outside of our borders.
Mhm.
And it's almost designed that way. The more they keep us from knowing what's going on outside the world, the less we can respect what's going on and can only see us as being, again, the American exceptionalism. Uh, so many other countries know so far more, there are people, about what's going on in the world than us. Americans, many Americans, not all, of course, but you give them the poll on the street, where is X, Y, and Z? They don't have a clue where things are. The media is very much responsible because they're not only do they have sponsors, but there are six companies, corporations that own about 90% of all media,
Mhm.
from print, media, visual, radio, whatever it might be. And the last thing they want, Disney, Comcast, Viacom, and three others, I can't remember which ones they are. The last thing they would want is really an educated population, and that the population is aware of what's going on. Like, President Trump always talks about fake news, and he is absolutely right. Now, his fake news is anything that talks smack against him. But to me, fake news is when you prevent the people from knowing what's going on, or misrepresenting what's going on, or simply telling a snippet of what's going on and then moving on to the NFL and that sort of thing. We are purposely made ignorant of the news. You have to go into shows like yours and other independent media to see what the hell is going on. You're not going to get it from CNN, NPR. They're they're just spokespeople for the Pentagon, the State Department, and Wall Street, because they are all controlled by Wall Street. They are the sponsors. They own these media outlets, and they're not going to want Americans to know that there's more than two sides to a story, that there are 100 different sides, and we're not always on the right side, because we are always on the right side. And look at the language that's used when we were fighting in Iraq. Insurgents. To me,
Mhm.
insurgents sounds bad, almost like terrorists.
Mhm.
I don't know. I kind of saw them as freedom fighters,
Yeah. Yeah.
the Iraqis and others, wherever the world, wherever things are happening. Like, for example, and this is something that wish I could know more about, the whole situation of the Uyghurs in China. Who do you believe? Are
Mhm.
they being oppressed by the Chinese? Are they put in concentration camps, or is it a small segment of them that are the Wahhabis,
Mhm.
who are supported by Saudi Arabia and creating internal terrorism against China and other countries nearby? What's the story there? The U.S. is not going to tell its people, both sides, and say, you figure it out. This
Mhm.
is our line. This is what's going on. And the media will reinforce that. So that's, to me, fake news. When you don't tell the truth, or you misrepresent the truth, or you don't tell even the story, whether it be in Israel, Palestine, whether it be Venezuela, whether it be the Dakota pipeline, you don't hear the other side. You don't even hear about Medicare for all. That wasn't even on President Obama's table when he was discussing that. Healthcare. It had to be a corporate approach to delivering healthcare. Medicare for all, supported by the majority of the American people, and even a small majority of Republicans want it, but Aetna, they don't want it, and
Mhm.
the other insurance industries, they don't want that to happen. you
Mhm.
know so they prevent, the media gets their cue. This is what we talk about. This is what you're going to be told. And where are the days of the Walter Cronkites and the others? They're gone. And there aren't any of those anymore, except, again, in the independents like yours and other programs, to hear what's really, really going on. But unfortunately, you're a minority. The vast majority of Americans get their news from the TV stations, the major networks. And you really, really have to look beyond that to know what's going on and make a really informed decision. And that's intentional. And that's why we as a country are quite ignorant of things that are going on. Other countries, they know far more than we do. I'm a high school teacher. My students are from all over the world, but right now, mostly Central America, South America, and elsewhere. Even they know what's going on. and I've had adult foreign students. I mean, they know more about our country. They know that there are 50 states. I talk to American kids who don't know how many states there are. So, they're far more informed about us. Also, the other thing is, except for the immigrant population, the joke is, what's people who speak two languages is bilingual, three is trilingual, more is multi. What's one language, and that's American. So, we don't know foreign languages. We don't know what it's like in other cultures unless we're part of it or we've been there. But the bulk of Americans really don't. Again, it's that exceptionalism. I go back to that prevents us from really reaching out and knowing what is going on because we know it all. We are the best. But
I want to go back to something you said. You brought up Obama.
okay.
You brought up President Obama, and I'm hearing a little feedback, but
Okay.
I'll work through it a second. Oh, why is it that he was so capable of pulling the wool over Black America's eyes? Because some of his policies were the most detrimental to Black America, and he bombed more Black or African countries than any other president, and more Muslim countries.
Child poverty rose under him. The wealth gap rose under him.
Incarceration.
And incarceration, yeah, but that's a Democratic thing. They like that. Well, the Republicans are just as racist when it comes to that as well. Yeah, what is the mystique around Obama? I think it helped that he had a non-dramatic family in a way. He didn't have like the Bush twins to be party goers. He had children. We haven't had children in the White House since Kennedy. I remember little Caroline. I remember little what the hell his name is. I forgot the other guy. But we haven't had that. So it was a real family. Like the Huxtables. Upper middle class and all that. Also, he was a very good speaker. I personally never saw the value of his rhetoric. I never saw that as so. I'm really big on rhetoric, on speeches. I've written speeches. He never impressed me all that much. But I think it was just that he was so almost like white bread. He was like, there was nothing of substance to him. He was good on the rhetoric to people. People believed him. That he was Black, a lot of people voted and supported him for that reason. Because, you oppose him for his positions, and of course you're immediately labeled a racist. No, he was against healthcare. He was for bombing these countries. He was for incarceration. He gave the bankers a break when millions of Americans were left homeless because of him. Oh, but you're a racist if you're attacking him. I don't know. You got to tell me why did Black Americans really look up to him, other than the fact that he was Black?
He was Black. That's right.
Why?
And like I said, when I like to point out these things because I don't hold back. I call an ace and a spade a spade. Under him, incarceration of Black people went up tremendously. There were as the people are in outrage right now about police killings. They spiked under him, and he said little to nothing about it. He also implemented some of the most.
The caging of children started.
Yes, the caging of he was the one who implemented the caging of children. The policies of sanctioning and tightening the sanctions on independent African leaders in their nations, and also waging more wars on Africa than his predecessors.
He created an entire NATO in Africa.
That's right.
African countries are now under military control, or at least military presence.
That's right.
NATO and the U.S.
and bomb more Muslim countries.
Yeah.
But this gets left out because he can. It's almost like he's a magician or something. And I try to bring this to the forefront of Black issues, but it gets I get a lot of feedback. But I'm trying to inform people of the truth about every one of these people. Joe Biden is no better. He helped Obama implement the policies that he implemented.
Yeah, and it's so weird that with Black Lives Matter, for example, so many of those who support Black Lives, I'm not talking the leadership, but those who would be out in the streets with their Black Lives Matter T-shirt, they want you to vote for the very people that were the architects
Yeah,
and the enforcers of the incarceration problem we have here.
yeah.
Eh, eh,
Hillary Clinton.
yeah. Now, one of the other things is. I guess with Obama following the idiot Bush, what you now have an intelligent person in the White House, someone who actually not only went to school but taught at the university. Something you couldn't say about George Bush. So there was that major tone of difference between the two presidents, just like Trump and Biden. Biden is even more right wing than Trump in many ways, but Biden will be the nice Uncle Joe rather than Trump being the wacko Uncle Joe or Uncle Donald or
Uh,
whatever. So again, I think we look at things in a very superficial way. We don't go deep. We're not taught to think critically. The media helps that in so many ways. Not to be critical in looking at issues. So Obama needs to be exposed for the crimes that he has committed. They've all been, and it's not just Obama. Think of, well, yeah, you were saying,
I said, yeah, you were talking about he needs to be exposed, and I'm saying all of them have to be exposed. But I was bringing this point home with Obama because a lot of people throw this out, and he instituted policies similar to or mirrored back from what Trump has done or his predecessors done. Only he
yeah,
in the black community they don't talk about that. Some of the largest wealth transfer at the time had come from the black community out of the black community by Obama,
yeah, yeah,
and more people in the black community was put in poverty
right.
because of Obama's policies, and everybody ignores that. So I wanted to say this concerning him. Do you think that he was a CIA job? Because think about this: his grandparents, his mother,
Yeah,
they
yeah,
all were CIA spooks, and then this guy came out of nowhere. He was a fundraiser, a local politician. Then he came out of nowhere. He was a senator. He didn't even serve the full 4 years, and then
and he
out of
lost,
nowhere becomes the president.
his race for Congress against a real black person,
Yeah, yeah,
and
that's, that's what I'm saying.
sorry.
But this is left out. This is actually left out. His grandparents, his mother, all of them
Yeah.
were connected to the CIA, and this guy comes from nowhere and becomes a senator and did not even finish out his whole
Well,
entire term and becomes president.
I wouldn't say that he was a CIA plant. I would say he was Wall Street's plant, and they just do what CIA does what Wall Street wants as well. So I think they just all work together. I wouldn't say he was specifically groomed like a Manchurian candidate to be the CIA's man in the White House. I think once he was in the White House, he knew, and from his personal background and all that, yeah, the CIA, what they're doing, we just have to back them up and follow along with what Wall Street tells us to do and what the CIA is already doing because they're all in agreement. I don't think it was manipulated. I think it was just that was because you say he was a no he was a blank shirt, kind of a guy. You didn't know what he really stood for. Again, it was more rhetoric than substance. That he was just there because the party wanted someone who could be a good Republican for the Democrats and a good member of Wall Street's entourage in a way to do. Because look who created his cabinet. It was um, mm, I forgot the name of the banking Citicorp. Citicorp picked his cabinet for him, so he was just part of that. I don't think he was planted. I think he was just that's the way they make sure it happens. That they have someone like an Obama to uh, fill in the seat and dot the i's and cross the t's for Wall Street.
And I wanted it was a major point that I wanted to bring home concerning this, and we could transition before I let you go because I know you're busy and you have things to do, and I wanted to bring this point home before I get to one of the last questions. Do you think that the reason I brought him becoming president, a two-time president out of nowhere, is because if George Bush would have implemented the policies that Obama had initiated and implemented, especially concerning Africa, the recolonizing of Africa and the bombing of African nations and the sanctioning of African governments to squeeze them into allowing America to put logistical bases there. Do you believe that it would have been met with outrage and protest because it was George Bush doing it? But so they had to put Obama in to implement that policy.
I think you're right. I think that makes sense. If you had, I mean, it's one thing to go after Muslim countries, but because there's so few Muslims in this country to react, and we have such a national hostility to Muslim countries, probably going back to the takeover of the American embassy, which was a result of us overthrowing their democratic government of Mossadegh. But yeah, I think if Africa became a target under George Bush, I think there would have been a larger groundswell of opposition. But because the media would have downplayed, like even today, they downplay how many African nations have U.S. military installations.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
We don't know that. Well, some of us do, of course, but the American public, the Black American public, doesn't really know the numbers and the extent of our involvement. So I think if Bush did it, he would have just done it differently. In a way, it was kind of like a lot of people said, well, if Al Gore won, we wouldn't have invaded Iraq. And I say, no, we would have. He just would have done it with a coalition, like George H.W. Bush did. He would have done it much cleaner as a warmonger. And I think the same with George Bush. He would have still gone into African nations, but I think they would have done it in a much slower way, and the media would have been behind him to minimize any kind of publicity about it. So I think it still would have happened, maybe just not as quickly,
Mm-hmm.
or maybe even quickly, because again, the media controls what people know. All the news has fit to print. All the news is that we want you to know is really what it is. And if George Bush had gone in full scale in different countries, I think they would have found a diversion somewhere else. Wait for a hurricane season to go into Africa. As you're in Florida right now, who knows what's going on right now because of what's being going on. But no, I think it still would have happened, just in a smaller scale and slower, and then build up to the way it is now. So regardless of whether it's a black president or a white president, it just would have been a matter of timing and the extent, and in that regard.
Mm-hmm. So before we close out, because like I said, I know you're a busy
I
guy and
appreciate
you
this.
have things that you have to do. What is your take on the situation in America, and how do you see this thing going economically? Especially, I was just hit with an alert that the Dow tanked about 900
900
points.
points this morning, yeah.
And with that said, and with her losing her position as the number one economy, and more debt being accumulated, and she's projecting more debt on future generations, and the political climate is constantly is close to explosion. What do you see on America streets and in America from here to 2025?
Well, in a very short term, first of all, if Biden wins, Wall Street will celebrate. And the whole problem of the debt and everything going on will be minimized to the American public. It'll still be there, and things will get worse and worse. But I think it will tone down the feelings in America right now if he is elected. Of course, we also don't know again about Trump's goon squads and what they're going to do afterwards. But as far as the economy goes, we're always in a hole. We've been in debt for a long, long, long time. Uh, Debt isn't always bad. I still own this house. I mean, my bank owns this house. Debt is good if you're using it for constructive purposes. I think what's going to happen is that debt has to be, well, you got to build the economy. And one way of doing that is by taking so much of the money out of the military and the corporate loopholes and the tax breaks and put it back into the American people with infrastructure for education, healthcare, make it so that we have something worth living for, and that'll almost build on itself. And I think that the debt will come down, but again, I honestly don't feel so horrified about the debt because we always have it. And again, it's not always bad. But I think we need to grow the economy, not in a Republican, capitalist, democratic way, but in a socialist way, so that we can get people back on the street working, remove the whole idea of homelessness by giving the homes that are vacant. I'm in Baltimore. You can imagine what our homes are like here. Um, and just make it so that people have something worth living for. Regardless of what the debt becomes and is, it'll be a much more sane society when people have something to live for. At the moment, we really don't. I mean, look how it has been. Kids are now moving in. I'm sorry, adults are moving into their parents' home if they even have parents who can handle it, financially. Uh, this generation is far worse than the previous generation. And the only way to reverse that is by giving this younger generation now the opportunity to really survive. And you can't survive on personal debt. You can't try to invest in something like an education if you are just trying to survive on your own. I think it kind of goes back to that we need to have our own personal debts relieved through all the school loans that are out needs to be completely abolished. We need to rein in the military 90%. We need to invest back into our economy, into our streets. We need to bring back the Eisenhower tax code of 90%, of the corporations. There's so much that we can do, but, we're at that precipice right now. Where are we going? It's a matter of, in a year, things will be back to normal, which was not good. But maybe with that, you can build on that by bringing it back down and bring it down, not just economically, the debt, but down back to the people. Let the people be the rulers of our economic society. Let the people be the ones setting the agenda. No longer the corporations and those who are funding the Congress members and those who actually make the decisions. Bring it back down to us. And I think maybe I'm a little bit optimistic, which is unusual for me, but I think that can happen if we are able to um, do that. But again, they're not designed, the Congress is not designed to do that. But with the likelihood of newer and younger, more radical members entering Congress, but and hopefully not in the Democratic Party side, because that only, how that co-opts them right away. Look at AOC, how co-opted she's been already. More people at least like her to give other people a hope that and a chance to really take on the establishment, the political establishment, as well as the economic. And also, we're long overdue for a national strike. Shut down the economy, not because of COVID, but because of workers demanding living wage, health care, the rights of workers, what we fought for and died for in the 30s. We're not doing that now. Build up the unions, build up the base. We're at 11% when we used to be 30%. Build back the unions and get rid of the union leadership that is so tied to the Democratic Party that keeps our wages down and keeps us, pitted against each other. We have to realize that it's in our hands, and we should be able to strike back.
Well, in closing, and I do want to thank you for everything. But is it do you want to inform the people about the teleconference that you'll be part of in the coming days?
Okay, this Sunday, I was invited to be part of a webinar on these issues at Tehran University. Um, and I don't remember the gentleman's name you mentioned. Uh,
Mohammed Marandi.
yeah, he'll be one of the other speakers. It's at 8:30 Sunday morning, which is about 7.5 hours later in Iran. I think it's 7.5.
Mhm.
So I don't know how it's going to be broadcasted, if it's live, if it's taped, recorded, or censored. I don't know how it's going to be, but I will let you know. I'll give you a link if there's such a link at that time.
Well, thank you for joining us, and we really appreciate it. We want you to have a blessed and safe
Thank
day.
you.
God bless you. We'll talk to you. And everyone who's listening, always remember this, that I love you, but God, He will always love you best. Thank you for joining us
Thank you
on
so
another
much.
edition of the Red Pill Diaries. Thank you,
All right,
Myles.
Wesley.
All right.
Yeah, have a